How does that? Yay.
Hi, Dan. I mean, Aaron.
You can call me Darren. Can you hear me on the live stream? Raise your hand if you can hear me on the live stream. Wait. I don't know how the internet works. All right, so DevOps Days Kansas City is coming up in October this year. Last year was September. The year before that was October. This is extra history that you don't really care about at all. But our CFP is closed. The tickets are available. There should be a code that you can use to get $25 off, or if you buy in bulk, you can get more money off, and I think you can do both of those things. So you should buy tickets soon. We announced the speakers, and there should be a tweet about that. We're, again, bringing a great mix of people from both of the coasts and a lot of local speakers coming from companies that either provide services or they're going through the same or similar situations that you all are going through at your company of trying to do some form of like transformation. So I'm super stoked about the schedule that we have. So buy tickets or reach out to us on the Slack about getting tickets. Speaking of Slack, if you're not on the Slack, you should get on the Slack. We have great conversations every day. I'm not sure what people talked about today, but I know some people were upset about something. So, or wait, that's just pretty much every day, right? It's technology. There's something that was going on. So yeah, join the Slack and join the conversation. Also, we're streaming right now on the YouTube. We called up the people on YouTube and said, hey, can we have a channel? And they gave us one. So now we're on the interwebs or whatever. But I don't get how the internet works yet. That's why I come to these things. Now comes the awkward part where I ask you for announcements, and then I try to think of announcements also. This is where you can talk about if you have a job that maybe somebody would be interested in, you could share that right now. We also have a channel for job announcements on the Slack. We also have, if you have meetups that are coming up that people should know about, or conferences that the community should know about. I know Lean Agile KC, the tickets are available now. That is in November. I believe there are other conferences coming up that I'm not remembering. So, All Day DevOps? When is that?
17th.
It's October 17th. Yes. Yes, it's the same day as the first day of the DevOps Days Kansas City conference. So 2 people from our stage, maybe 1 person, somebody from our stage will be actually transmitting live over the tubes.
Yeah, and I'll be presenting as well from somewhere at some point during that day. And if you register, you can get access to all the videos afterwards, so you can enjoy our conference, and then at night you can watch that or something.
Yeah.
However you go to.
Have you heard of All Day DevOps? It is a really cool thing where 24 hours straight, how many tracks? 5 tracks. So that's over 120 hours. Math in front of people.
Where is it at? Or is it online thing?
It's worldwide. So they try to do it around the world at the time that would be the business hours for that particular area. And it's, like it says, all days, and you can pick different things to go to live. I believe that you can kind of interact in that you can ask questions on the tubes and the
Slack channel that everyone, all the attendees can go and chat on. And so, like after my session last year, I basically chatted for the entire hour for the entire half hour, 45 minutes of the next person in the session. So you have that interaction, and then people will sit there and talk for days after that. It's pretty cool. You can go and see the videos from last year. You got your email address. Sometimes the most
Cool. Any other announcements?
Splunk user group is September 19th.
Splunk user group, September 19th. Where at?
Don't have a location yet. We have a speaker.
What is the speaker going to do?
Speakers coming in, going to talk about data from AWS and Azure.
Nice.
Making something up.
I said everyone loves Azure. The Heartland Dev Conference, if you guys are interested in going to Omaha, September 5th to the 7th.
The Heartland Developers Conference,
Yeah.
Omaha, Nebraska,
Yep.
September 5th through the 7th. Awesome. I saw that one last year. That crept up on me. We also have in the Slack an upcoming events channel, and it's a great place to just post links to stuff like this.
Job openings, we do that now.
Yeah.
We've got a couple at Garmin, fans interested, software engineers, DevOps, platform. There's 2 openings for platform and 1 for content delivery.
Okay. Garmin,
Garmin.
platform, and
Content delivery.
content delivery.
But
Awesome.
anyone that's a good software developer.
And we do have a job opportunities channel where you can post like the links in there. That's how I got my current job. Is there was a link posted in there, and I was like, sweet, I'll take that. Watch out, that's mine, guys. I boxed out. Wait, I still don't understand how the internet works. You can't box out on the internet, can you? If you can, let me know. I'll figure it out.
Are you going to use that admin person?
Yeah, I think you're an admin in Slack.
Oh, okay.
It's weird. We all never saw that post.
Oh, yeah, you guys didn't see that post?
That's really weird.
Oh.
We have a position here at C2FO, if you're interested in this location. Gary will be speaking tonight if you want to see some of the stuff we do.
Is it,
It's a DevOps, if you have, say, DBA or developer experience, yeah. That's what I'm currently looking for.
you say you're looking for, so it's on your team?
Yes.
So they should,
On the DevOps team here.
so definitely talk to you tonight or on Slacks?
For me, a bunch of us here, Chris
Yeah.
Stein, Jonathan Stacks, Gary Colley, we have the home field here.
This is great. What else? I love all this sharing.
We're going to say thank you for the location.
Yes. Our awesome sponsors. C2FO, thank you for the location and the food. And does someone want to come up and talk about C2FO at all? I probably should have talked about this at... What?
All the hands get raised.
I thought I was volunteering.
You get to hear from me twice.
All right.
Say it's a great place to work.
So I can make it really simple what C2FO does. So we provide a platform for small businesses to get paid early on their contracts. That's the gist of it. Those contracts are invoices, and we have a get paid early and a lending side. And I'll talk a little bit later specifically on what I'm doing related to the lending side and some cryptography stuff if you're interested. But it's a fun place to work. We have a lot of perks. If you have any questions, as Tom mentioned, you can ask me, Tom, Stacks, or Stein. And you can refer to me as me. I won't say my name, but Gary.
Awesome. Big hand for our sponsors. I love this company. Cool. With that, I think that Avi's up first. And you're going to talk about code reviews, being more successful with code reviews.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
No, this is. All right. Is this a mic for both or that one too? They're both picking it up, right? The one in the middle? Okay. Oh, sure. Okay, cool. Awesome.
That's broadcasting to the internet.
Cool.
All
All right. All right. So the key to successful code reviews. I'm going to start off with a quote. The average defect detection rate given unit testing is only 25%. Functional testing is 35%. Integration testing is 45%. But code inspections, or as we call code reviews, have proved to be 55 to 60%. This is a quote from the book Code Complete from Steve McConnell, and it's very dear to my heart. So who am I? My name is Avindra Fernando. I'm a senior software engineer at RSA, focused on front-end web development. Lately, they've kind of wanted me to focus a little bit on the DevOps side of things because we're trying to go through a transformation as well. So starting from scratch a little bit, long way to go, but it's been a good experience so far. So you guys can follow me on Twitter, Medium, and that's my GitHub repo. So who all here does code reviews? Okay, almost a lot of people. What do you guys think the biggest benefit of a code review is?
You get to learn different ways of doing stuff.
Yep, you hit it spot on. Yeah, so the main motivation, although the main motivation of a code review remains to find defects, really the biggest benefit that I get, and I think a lot of you guys will get, is a learning aspect. Code reviews are a really good way for someone to learn what they don't know and help out someone else. So this is a quote from a white paper that Microsoft published. So expectations and outcomes of challenges of the modern code review. They say the main motivation, although the main motivation of a code review is finding defects, really the benefits are about knowledge transfer and the learning of it. So in code reviews, there are two main parties in a code review. So today I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks that I've tried and you guys can try, which will help your lives easier as one of those parties. So the first party is the author, the person who writes the code. So the first tip, check your work before you submit a code review. So what I mean by this is treat the code that you write as a work of art. I think all of us are designers, all of us are artists. Like we create stuff, and that's pretty magical. So before you submit, before you show your work of art to someone else, make sure it's cleaned up a little bit. Because that's something that we all take pride in, that the code we write. So the second thing is provide a little context. So I've gotten feedback about this one, and I do agree for the most part. It's saying, why do we have to provide context? Code should be self-documenting, right? Great. I think for new code, I fully agree with that. But we do have to go work with legacy code, we have to support legacy code, and for those scenarios, it's not always practical to go refactor a lot of things, right? So if you're working legacy code, I would say provide a little context. So that way, the person who's reviewing your code knows, okay, yeah, they've done some work in this part of the code and refresh my mind a little bit because I worked on it 5 years ago, right? So give a little bit of context through in the code review itself or through a different way, or you sit with them, or however you wanna communicate that. But the point is, give a little bit of a background. Lastly, test your code. So by this, what I mean is you don't have to extensively do all the testing, right? You have different steps to take care of that, but at least do a sanity check before you submit. So these are something that we can do before someone else looks at your code. So don't expect the reviewer to do the testing for you. So if none of these are done, then this kind of happens, where the author could think, hey, I'm not going to go check a lot of this stuff because that's what the reviewer will catch or will tell me. But then the opposite effect can happen where the reviewer could think, hey, maybe they really know what they're doing, so I don't really need to check that. At the end of the day, things get fallen from the cracks, and then we have defects come in because of that thinking, right? So as an author, make sure you cover your base before you submit it to the reviewer. The second point is keep it short. We generally, as humans, cannot process a lot of information, so keep the code review short. So submit multiple code reviews if you have to. If not, you're going to run into this, right? You submit a small function, you're going to get a lot of feedback. If you submit 500 lines, trust me, no one's going to read it. They're just going to say it's fine, and that's that. So keep it short. And lastly, just don't take it personally. We're in this field because of our passion, but the same passion could actually sometimes affect our egos, right? So I could see how it could get personal if your code's being challenged, right? But just make sure, don't take it too personally, because then you can't progress in a code review. So try to accept the feedback constructively, right? Have a conversation. You don't always have to agree with what the reviewer is saying. If you do disagree, follow the oppose-propose theory. So that basically is saying, hey, I'm not going to agree to your feedback, but here's why, right? And have a conversation and show the reviewer my approach, my algorithm is actually better in this scenario, right? And the reviewer will gladly learn something from you, but don't just say, hey, I'm not going to do it, and leave it at that. Cool? All right, so these are some of the tips and tricks for what you can do as an author. Now, what can you do as a reviewer? So the same thing in a little bit opposite way is provide constructive feedback whenever you can, and give praise. The reason to give praise, we only think of code reviews as some place where we need to find defects, or we need to find ways to improve. But code reviews are a great way to give someone praise, right? Because a code review will have other members from your team, and then if you've seen, hey, Gary wrote this amazing algorithm, right? If you give Gary praise in the code review, then the other team members are going to be able to see, oh, great, I'm going to follow the same work. So give kudos when it's deserved. So use a code review as a mechanism to provide that. So basically, don't be this Batman. And the second thing is how you communicate, how you say it. So be conscious of tone. So instead of saying, what were you thinking? You can possibly say, hey, what do you think about it? It essentially says the same exact thing, but I guarantee you, this way will get you a defensive response. And once you get a defensive response, there's no conversation. So this way it would encourage more conversation, and you can keep challenging each other until you guys find the optimal solution to move forward. So another example would be, hey, why didn't you do it? You could say, hey, what about this? Can we come and try this? Or, what you've done here is plain incorrect. You can challenge them with, hey, have you thought about what happens in this edge case, right? So that encourages the author to critically think about, hey, what did I miss, right? So you're challenging them to improve. So I think that'll be a good learning experience. And finally, learn together. This is, again, the biggest benefit that I see from a code review is the learning aspect of it. So learn together. Teach what you know and learn what you don't know. I think in a code review, it doesn't matter if you're an intern, if you're a software engineer, if you're a senior, if you're a principal, lead, everyone has something to contribute. So you can even learn from the intern as well as the intern can learn from the most senior member of the team, right? So teach what you don't know. Use this as a way to learn what you don't know as well. And everyone should review code. One of the things I was trying to fix, and I've gotten successful at in my current company, is I saw some teams were, when they did code reviews, they were only adding just one person, right? So it's me just adding Gary, and that was it. And that was not very productive because half of the team was missing out. They didn't even know what was going on. So I encourage everyone to say, hey, can we add a little more people to the review so we can get more perspectives, more feedback? Not only to get feedback and perspectives, but actually, if it's an intern or the newest member in the team, that's how they learn, right? You can't go show the newest people every single line of code that you write every day. That's not practical. But if they can be added to a code review, then at their leisure, they can see what's going on. The conversations track that. So it's better to add a little more people. I would encourage, at least, if you can afford it, at least add 3 people. And the benefit of learning is there as well. But the biggest benefit would be if you have a disagreement between the 2 parties, having that third person break a tie would be good, so you can move forward. So most importantly, I think code reviews are a lot of fun, so have fun. All right, any questions? Yeah.
What tools do you currently use for your code reviews?
So in the past, I've used Crucible, and then the reviews on GitHub, reviews on Visual Studio itself, so a variety of mix. But I would say my personal favorites probably would be GitHub. Reviews were pretty good. I liked it.
On the pull request?
Yep, on the pull request. Anything else what about any favorite tools from you guys?
We use Stash, but
Okay.
Atlassian.
Cool. Oh, so they rename Crucible? They don't use Crucible?
Isn't that their GitHub equivalent, or is their code hosting?
Yeah, it became.
Okay.
Yeah, Stash got renamed to Bitbucket, but Bitbucket has some code review stuff, and then there's Crucible still, so it's.
Okay, cool.
Crucible is like the more robust.
Yeah.
Reviewed system.
Gotcha.
It's only on Crucible.
I don't know. I don't know if they have a SaaS offering or not. They do have Bitbucket.
Yeah, I haven't used it in a while, so.
We use.
Cool.
I got a question. You said choose your wording, instead of what are you thinking, that type of scenario. What if you have the scenario where you've got a really great coder, but they're just doing really stupid stuff?
Yep.
And I mean, sometimes you got to just say, hey, what were you actually thinking on that? I mean, you run into that scenario. I mean, is this kind of a
Yeah.
one-off deal? I mean, you get the 3 people to kind of say, hey, but when you get an issue where you have people teaming up on other people, but this guy's really good, for example, coding-wise, I mean.
Yep. I think that depends. Like, if you know that person really well, if you know the dynamics, then
Gotcha, okay, so it's.
right, then it'll differ. But for everyone else, I would at least give someone 3 chances,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
And the third time you gotta be like, hey man,
Okay.
no.
It's kind of, because you had the 3-person in there, I was like, okay, were you thinking the 3 strikes you're out type thing? So.
Yeah.
I'd say don't do it as in part of the code review either. Like if it's something that's like systematic or like happens often, like take it to a different venue so you're maybe
Bring it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're gonna have a full-blown discussion, just have a follow-up conversation. You had a question, right?
Yeah, I did. First of all, thanks for presenting this. That was really interesting as well.
Cool, thanks.
You touched on a couple of really key DevOps principles in the middle of your talk there. One is we want to deploy very frequently,
Mhm.
and you want to keep your change set small.
Yep.
So I think you were really clear that code reviews are important because everybody learns from them. But how are you working on making sure it doesn't become a bottleneck and you end up sucking a lot of people's time doing code reviews? So could you talk a little bit about
Sure.
the process of how and when you decide to do a once a week, getting a whole group of people together, or how are you actually initiating code reviews and then sort of designating that a change set has had a peer review?
Yeah, so we approach a couple of ways. So to answer that question, I think the real answer is it depends, right? Like how many people do you actually have? And if you only have a few people, then it's pretty hard. If you have about 3 to 4 people, then you can say, hey, we'll all review our code, it'll be faster. But then you don't want to get into a scenario where you have this one gatekeeper that every review has to go through. That's not good, that's not healthy, even if they are the most knowledgeable in the company, right? So then the real thing is, hey, can we train someone else to get to that level very quickly so they can help out? But what we've been basically trying is we submit a code review on a day and say, hey, the general rule of thumb is I'll give you 48 hours to give me feedback, right? And then if you don't get feedback within 48 hours, then you can kind of bug the reviewer about it. So that's how we made sure that things were going faster, and everyone on the team kind of agreed to it. So then the dynamics were set.
So it's kind of a full process. The author says, hey, I want a code review, and then people jump in and help with it.
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, so in the tooling, you add the reviewers, and then they get notifications, things like that.
Does everybody do it that way, or everybody do it differently?
Does anyone do like a meeting style review where you go into a room and say, hey, this is a code review hour, or?
We do. We do
Yeah.
both kinds.
Okay.
We do both kinds. It's kind of the scope of, like, obviously, totally, new code, totally new code, new features tends to be something that's going to be in person.
Cool.
And then stuff that's more routine tends to be all through the tool.
Yeah.
Maybe this is related, but one thing that I've done in the past is we wrote some stuff to create sort of game metrics, which sounds wonky, but the gist of that was is we considered code review real work. Like at the end of the week, things would be quantified, and people would be given points, and then we were given stuff or whatever. But the real idea behind it was to make sure that people who did code review were really recognized, and then at the end of every week during a showcase, we would talk about how much code review someone did. And like the deal is it gets buried, right? And that's when it gets backlogged.
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure that it's part of your job description, right? And it's really recognized is probably the thing that I know to do.
There's a commercial offering, right, that has like the gaming metrics around code review.
I'm not sure if we were
There is one.
around, but
I'd love to hear somebody that's used it. I don't think it's like super expensive, but it was more expensive than our Atlassian, so that was
Yeah.
a question.
So you just basically said, make code reviews a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, whether you're having fun or not, you should at least get recognized for doing it.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, then it will become skunk works, and then no one will want to do it,
Yep.
and it'll become a barter system, right?
Mhm.
Which only works for so long.
Yeah. Sure. Cool.
I had one team, and I actually missed this in Crucible. It's the one thing I missed in Crucible, is that it showed, like, we had it set up so everyone had to approve, and you could see like how much time people spend in it, which is garbage because, right, so some people do the reviews inside of their IDE or whatever, so it doesn't really represent it. And now I've been in a number of other cases where like only one person has to approve, and it did cause a bottleneck on our team for a while, but then everyone just kind of got to where they're like, okay, first thing I do when I get in the morning is spend 10, 15 minutes on code review, right, before I do
Yeah.
anything else. And it became that important on the team to actually go do it. And then I've had other teams where if only one person has to approve it, as soon as that one person approves it, everyone's like, sweet, I'm out. And then we don't get as many eyes on the stuff, so.
Yeah, if you can afford it, maybe have 2 people, right? Yeah.
Now, what about the scenario if you write the code, you break it, who owns up to it? That person who writes it, or you send it off to another team that fixes things? What's kind of the thought process behind that? Kind of curious. Like if we write the code,
So-
you break it. Yeah. You break it, you own up to it, you fix it?
You can't merge it if it breaks.
Okay.
Oh,
You
in
approve
that
it,
scenario, yeah, you should own it,
You own it, okay.
That's the only way.
right?
What now?
Yeah, if it breaks the build, it doesn't go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say it breaks on later on down the road, it's kind of what I'm saying, is it more of a philosophy where people say, hey, you know, it works now, but let's say it breaks a month down the road, do you own up to it, or do you have like a team that's responsible for that? What are a lot of people doing on that scenario? That's what I'm kind of curious about.
So that scenario, I think it'll be the QA teams coming back and reporting it. Yeah. Yeah, it goes to the pipeline and get
Like a bug
Yeah.
ticket kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if the defect was found while the code review happened, you definitely own up to it.
Okay, I was
Yep.
just kind of curious about that, so.
Yeah.
What people were thinking and different thoughts, so.
Yeah.
I have a great team right now. It happened to me today. I broke partial functionality in prod. And the person that reviewed and approved it saw in Slack that someone was like, hey, this thing isn't working. And she jumped on it and fixed it, checked it in, and pushed it through. Like, I hope to be on teams like this, continuing going forward. It wasn't like, hey, you messed it up. She's like, I reviewed it. I didn't see that. I'm going to fix it. Yeah.
But
Yep.
you didn't, so but you didn't have any way to know that before with production?
It did not break a build or anything. It was Terraform, and we don't have
Got it.
Terraform
Okay.
tested
Mhm.
yet.
Yeah.
So I broke a connection on a security group to a security rule. So when someone went to go do something, they couldn't do it.
Cool.
So we have kind of an interesting setup where we have like a lot of integration where you get a GitHub token, and then we have tooling that'll build like a pull request as you, and it'll tag like people on your team and stuff like that.
Oh,
And it's
nice.
very dependent upon like the size. Like, you know, each team has its own, like you need on this size of a PR approximately 2 reviewers or only 1 or 4. And so I think like I don't know if we've had any PRs that really go like more than a day or a day and a half without like if
Yeah.
it is it's because the person's like adding more to the
Mhm.
PR. It's not like for lack of reviews. Because it is like, you know, through hip chat we get like pinged
Yeah.
on it.
So you guys have made it a priority as a team and agreed to say we got to provide fast feedback, right?
Yeah, I don't even know like,
Yeah.
if we said anything or if we just got lucky that, you know, people want to do it because they want their reviews. Like, I don't know if we just got
Yeah.
lucky. And if we like we scale our team more, we'll have a problem. I don't know.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, thanks.
All right. Now we got Gary with Azure Kubernetes awesomeness.
I don't have nearly as much material.
Okay.
So don't get excited about long amounts of times. And I'm going to sit down. That's why I brought the stool in.
Just keep it warm for you.
Jeff, is the mic gain good enough? Man. It's because I'm so tall? Nope. That's not supposed to be there. There it is. I use a lot of Windows. A lot of my people use tabs. I do not. All right, so what I'm going to go over will be fairly quick, but it is to sort of give at least some knowledge that we've acquired in using Azure and Kubernetes together. Whether or not you think that's a good idea, you can ask that question afterwards. This is our first 5 months. We've been in production for these 5 months. I thought it was longer, but I was remembering a different date. So sort of our goal with the project, why we're in Azure, is as I mentioned, C2FO sort of has two pieces of a business. One is what we call early payment for invoices. It's called early pay. That whole business is around taking invoices from big companies, Amazon, Costco, Walmart, doing a bunch of churn on them, and then the people who supply them with, say, t-shirts, anything else like that, goods, food, anything you buy at a store. They sell it there. But normally what happens is they have to wait 90 days, 60 days to get paid. So what our platform does, the main part of the business, is they have a negotiation so you can say, oh, all right, I'll give you a 2% discount on what you owe me. So if you owe me $100,000, if you pay me tomorrow $98,000, we're good. I'll take that. Costco just made $2,000 that they wouldn't have made otherwise. The supplier gets their money earlier to reinvest in their business. So that is our main application. It's been around for, I believe, 8 years now. And we are a startup, but that application has a lot more features that are a bit more stable, and the way that it runs is a little more predictable, and we do less things like try it out. If it completely fails, just throw it in the trash, because we've figured out sort of the business model of how that application works. Now, the reason we've tried stuff out in Azure is I'm on a team that focuses on business lending. And we started this initially 2 years ago, and we're now on to our second sort of version of a business lending product. And we've been in conflict in our DevOps world around our main application and this sort of startup within a startup. And the team that I am on specifically, we want to move really fast, just get things done. We don't necessarily care about process or what happens, for better or worse. So that sort of led us to Azure, because we knew we wanted to be in Kubernetes. At the time, AWS didn't have anything we could use that wasn't us running it, and due to the limited size of our teams. I should state, Tom mentioned people on teams. I'm technically not on the DevOps team. I'm like a DevOps team friend. So our team decided to try out deploying a new application. It's written in C#. And we initially thought it was going to be sort of mobile and web-based. So we chose, ideally, a platform that would allow us to easily run in Azure, run on mobile devices. Some things have changed, but that's why we went with Azure compared to other cloud offerings. So as we started the project about 8 or 9 months ago. And some of the biggest changes, if you're familiar with AWS, or DigitalOcean GCP, Google Cloud Platform, is very different than Azure. The way you interact with it seems to have a very unfamiliar feel, if you will, if you're someone who's been accustomed to AWS for the last 10 years. At the beginning, the other piece of it was getting used to documentation, and because of when we started, most of what we were using from a cloud offering standpoint was all in alpha. They could call it beta, but it was essentially alpha from the standpoint of what we were consuming for the Azure parts of our application. Which, as you can imagine, it wasn't the worst. So from a change standpoint, the UI is a pretty big piece for us to get used to. Show it over here. I haven't seen a different cloud provider sort of give you the same interaction, and it's been difficult to jump between all the different clouds. So our main application we run across basically each one of the main cloud providers. And so when we started to deploy our new app over here in Azure, which we hadn't really been using, it was difficult because it was essentially just me wondering how it worked, and then I would ask other people for help, and then they just kept asking me why I was using Azure. But once you get used to the UI, it's actually not so bad. It does some nice grouping for you, but you have to sort of change your model if you're used to AWS or GCP of how you expect resources to look in the UI. I mean, if you just think they wanted a desktop app in the web browser, that is basically what was built. So from a change standpoint, that took a lot for me to get used to. A lot of UI, UX problems just in interacting with the platform. I kept Googling around how to do things, and it seemed that most that heavily used the Azure platform basically just went through the CLI, the command line interface, ran everything through either Ansible scripts, any scripting they could, or they just hand typed out the commands in the terminal because it was difficult to sort of figure out how you link certain things together in the UI. And as I'll explain later around upgrading Kubernetes, the UI sometimes doesn't work. Yeah, so the other big change was the management, and then the grouping sort of helped me better understand the concepts. So initially, when we were writing the functions, we were going to deploy to AWS, but we decided to go with Azure. In AWS, there's key. It's not called Key Vault. It's the key thing. Yes. There's KMS for key management. Azure has something very similar called Key Vault. And if you were to deploy straight to a VM, it does a lot of nice things like the profiles you get in Amazon, so your permissions are managed by sort of the box you're deployed on. As it would turn out, that is not the case, or rather when we initially deployed, and is sometimes the case, you can't necessarily use all the core Azure concepts when you deploy with Kubernetes in Azure. So that was unfortunate because I was trying to learn Azure really fast to get deployed. So I was like, oh, I'll use this MSI package and I'll be able to use all the permissions that are built in. That was not true. That was unfortunate. The other interesting part of the adventure was their continually changing documentation. I don't know if you've looked at any of Microsoft's documentation over the last year. They've been doing a great job of updating it, but a very, I'll say, less than ideal job of marking what is no longer valid. So I would Google search, figure out how to do something, and within like a couple days, that page would change. So that would make it even more difficult. So that was a hard learning part, and that's actually still the case. So before I did this, I went and looked at their tutorial for getting Kubernetes set up. This command is not at all what their original command was for setting it up. This is actually why our role-based stuff broke on the production upgrade, I found out. So that their documentation is ever-changing. The other piece down there in the feedback, they've sort of fundamentally changed how you interact with their documentation. So if you notice an issue now, it's really cool because you can comment on any one of Microsoft's pages and say, oh, I've noticed a problem here. Or, hey, this didn't quite work for me, so you can ask questions. And it's nice because we'll automatically log a GitHub issue for you in the background. And then all the information's tracked in source control on GitHub. The downside was when I initially looked at the documentation, that wasn't there. And there were a lot of existing comments that were really helpful, and then all those disappeared. So they used a different system before, and they didn't migrate it over. And you can still find those in Google search results for old enough pages. So sometimes you might want to click the cached version of a page on the Google search results to find helpful information because it will show it in sort of the beginning when you Google search. It shows you the beginning, you click through the page, and that's not what's there anymore. So that's something else. If you notice something that looks like just the problem you had and it disappeared, those are helpful. And then the other piece is our specifically with how we'd been doing deployments. With Kubernetes, Chris Stein and others had done a lot of work to sort of do a more managed version of Kubernetes deployment within AWS before they had a managed solution. And I was trying to read how we did that versus what could happen in Azure, because Azure is a managed Kubernetes deployment. And that also led to some confusion, mostly on my part. But something to be aware of if you do have some internal documentation about how you deploy your services. Try to keep in your mind what is specific to your deployment versus sort of the general practice for the specific thing. So in this case, Kubernetes. It's all worked out. We haven't actually had any issues with our service. The alpha pieces that we used was Postgres was actually just released as a supported managed database instance, which we had become accustomed to using RDS instances in AWS. So you get things like automated backups, point-in-time restores, and essentially you just have the database. You don't really have to worry about it nearly as much. It's worked out. If you go and read the documentation, the downside, and this wasn't in the docs because it had just been released, they don't support automatically upgrading you from, say, 9.6 to 9.7 or any of those. You have to do that all yourself. So I'll get to do that eventually. The other part, Kubernetes, Amazon Kubernetes Service, AKS. It is now officially supported. It's no longer an alpha or invite only. So that has helped. The upgrades there are pretty decent.
That's Azure Kubernetes Service and then Elastic Kubernetes.
Yes.
Very confusing name.
Yes. AKS is Azure's. EKS is Amazon's.
What's ECS?
That's an Elastic Compute. Yeah, container. Well, I was thinking EC2. There are a lot of acronyms, but if you just think Kubernetes Azure or Kubernetes Amazon, that will help you find your way. And the other problem with the alpha choice is where I'm very antsy to get things done. Stacks read it and smiled, but it's accurate. We just wanted to get things out there and deployed, so that's a big reason. So far, I'm happy with Azure. It hasn't been the easiest to use, but it hasn't been too terrible once we got used to it. And then finally, the other large portion of this was the Kubernetes, specifically managed by Azure and ran. If you're unfamiliar, Kubernetes is a deployment platform that makes it much easier to manage things like horizontal scaling of your platform, knowing when your services should restart. So it helps manage a lot of the sort of what I used to do for some of our teams, which was we'd go out, kill a box, restart it. Kubernetes is a very large platform that helps define things like routing between your services for you automatically. And then we all use another tool on top of Kubernetes called Helm, which I'll mention a little bit. But Kubernetes basically just makes it easier to manage large deployments of your services. Three main areas that we sort of worked through in our deployments. The initial setup of Kubernetes in Azure was not as easy as the 2-page tutorial made it sound like it would be. And I'll cover how we sort of first went live and then also the upgrades we've done with Kubernetes, so upgrading each version as we go along, and some quirks we have ran into. So I mentioned the documentation. The sort of worst part about the documentation for the Kubernetes deployment, even today, is it makes a very large assumption that you understand a good deal of Azure and Azure terminology. So if you read through the documentation and you're very confused, we're at least on the same page. Maybe other people aren't confused. But I was very confused when I initially read through it, and it was difficult to figure out how to deploy a Kubernetes cluster when, if I went to the Kubernetes documentation, it didn't seem like it should be as difficult. Another part of it when it comes to Kubernetes is Azure specifically, because Kubernetes is essentially an abstraction on top of an infrastructure. There are a lot of features that Kubernetes has available to it that you don't necessarily directly get to use in Azure. The same way you can if you're in Google's cloud, you can essentially use all the features. In Amazon's, you can use most. And then in Azure, it was kind of you can use all the ones you normally read about, but things like role-based access controls got added after we had already gone live. And then in our cluster upgrades, it added them after without sort of telling us. But that was all right. We at least got alerted. And then the other part is the fewer integrations. As long as you're using sort of things that are meant to integrate with just Kubernetes, for the most part, you'll be good. We haven't encountered too many problems from our setup that were focused on Kubernetes alone. But if you were using something, what was the one that we did have? So if you're familiar with ingress controllers, there are ways that it will automatically spin up a load balancer on the cloud platform, and then ways it will spin up essentially a VM on the cloud platform and then run Nginx or Apache or something for you. Whenever Azure first went live with Kubernetes, they did not support loading their own load balancers. So if you wanted to have sort of global routing, like that's one of the other big advantages that you can get out of Kubernetes is you can essentially have one IP address and then multiple CNAMEs that go to it, and then a bunch of Nginx rules can get written in the background for you, so that when someone goes to app.c2fo.com, it routes to a very specific application, admin. They'll all route to where they're supposed to, and all you define is a YAML file that tells it which services you want to go to. So it can make it much easier to do that integration. However, Azure lacked the automatic deployment of those front-end load balancers to easily do it. So we had to, fortunately, Chris actually did most of the work before I did to deploy your own load balancer using Nginx to manage all of that. But if you were to use Azure and Kubernetes, the initial setup, there are some features that are not directly there, but you can get to them. The first go live, we were mostly just lucky that we didn't encounter problems. That's our status page. It just says OK for the main application that's in there. The downside of how we have it running, we had no monitoring initially, as stated there. And then I realized after the app hadn't been running for about 12 hours and someone kept asking why, when they were trying to securely store some account information, it just was lost, was because I didn't have anything telling me the service was running. So Azure does have a thing called Application Insights, which works pretty similarly to how Pingdom works, but it has some cool configurations and it's super cheap. It's like $0.05 a month. And you can have it sort of ping with payloads or other things directly from different data centers to your source. And I don't know if you guys got the, I think, 80 emails over the weekend. I had it configured wrong after our last Kubernetes upgrade. Don't say you want to be alerted if 1 out of 5 checks fail. You want to be alerted if 4 out of 5 checks fail, because if all of them but one are fine, it's probably just that one having a network issue. Sorry for all the emails. And then when so related to our initial go live, Azure has a tutorial around setting up the Kubernetes instance. However, it turns out there are a lot of steps that were across like 8 pages. I could share these in a way that's a little easier to digest. This is an internal repo, but one of the sort of unique pieces to the way that Azure chose to do its authorization is you have to log in and get your credentials through Azure CLI, and then go through at that point to get your Kubernetes credentials to then be able to connect to the Kubernetes cluster. And then you can finally use Helm, which is sort of basically an application package manager. It makes it much simpler, at least for me, to interact with Kubernetes. So we had to write, well, we didn't have to, but I wrote a bunch of documentation around how we actually do the deployment rather than script it, because it was in alpha and is, I would say at this point, a little bit past beta, but I still don't really want to script it because it keeps sort of a moving target, and it's not worth it to script a deployment that changes. For upgrades have actually been not that bad, minus when you go and run the CLI for doing the upgrade. So had to add some upgrading a cluster doc because theirs tells you just hit the button in the UI and it works. I don't know how many times you've upgraded something, but it's very unsettling when you click a button and you get no feedback. You just see something that says upgrading ... So that was essentially That is their web UI still. You click upgrading, it just says that. You don't know if it's upgrading. And then the other bad part of that, and what we've encountered, and this is, I would say, one of the negatives of the Azure interface, is as soon as there's an error that happens, that upgrade button goes away, you can't click it, and essentially any of the buttons in the web UI no longer work for interacting with the Kubernetes cluster. But fortunately, the CLI still works, which is why all of this documentation is how we can check that an upgrade is working. One of the things I thought was neat about how the CLI works if you're doing a Kubernetes upgrade is you can give it a wait flag. So it'll, if say you used to do deployments manually and you would SSH out to a Bastion host and you'd start a screen session so that if you lost connectivity, your upgrade would still run. Azure at least has a nice way that you can pass a wait flag to your CLI command, and it'll essentially go and run that command on Azure so it's not running on your machine, so you don't have to worry about it losing connectivity. But some fun things that happened during our upgrade. Number one was the UI just not telling us. So I recommend not using the UI to upgrade and just running this AKS upgrade command. And so far, all of our upgrades have succeeded. We have had to run the command maybe 3 times in a row, but it eventually fixed itself. So it becomes, it's eventually consistent. But as long as you have connectivity to the Kubernetes cluster, you can also run the Kubernetes commands to know how your nodes, your Kubernetes nodes, which are the actual virtual machines that are running, you can see what operating system they are and how they're upgrading. So that's one thing that's kind of fun, is you can see it very slowly rolling upgrade. I think we have 5 nodes, or is it 3 nodes? I think it's 5. It takes about 12 minutes per node as it rolls across. But they do a very good job of, our site hasn't gone down yet other than the role-based access control issue while doing a rolling upgrade of the Kubernetes nodes. So that's one thing that's been nice, is upgrade of Kubernetes from, I think we started at 9.6 and we've gotten all the way to 9.11? Oh, is it 1.9 and then 1.11? There we go. Too many versions of things. But those upgrades have all gone pretty well. Other than it can take a while to finish. All in all, I would do this again. I don't think it's been too bad. And from a cost standpoint, Azure has been pretty cheap, especially compared to our equivalent in other areas.
Side by side, percentage-wise?
So part of it that is difficult to measure is the workloads between the two. So we have the mature product running. It has terabytes of data. This is still very small. The sort of cost-wise between the two is they're both Kubernetes clusters, and they're the image cost.
It's not a fair comparison, really, to compare one Docker container with 400.
Right.
Do like a side-by-side, hey, let me spin up this.
So my comparison is more on the cost of just the cluster running at sort of a static state. Compared across the two, it's not significantly cheaper, but it's been slightly cheaper. Part of that was because we were doing the alpha pieces of it, Azure charged less.
So I actually think that your side's tremendously expensive because we're only running your service on the 5-node cluster, whereas we get some kind of benefits of co-locating a bunch of other services. Like, so we've got our production app, which has, probably 90 services per environment, plus, other team stuff running on it to help defer that cost. They don't all spike at the same time. So.
How homogeneous is that, like, 90 services? Are they pretty similar, or are they?
They probably consist of close to 6 to 7 different languages.
Yeah.
We've got Python, Node, Go, Scala with the Akka
You left out Kotlin.
What?
You left out Kotlin.
Is Colin out there officially yet?
Yeah.
Or is it still in production?
What was the motivation for doing this on Azure if there was already footprint?
So at the time, sort of two pieces of motivation. One is the type of information that's being stored in this system is very sensitive information, bank account data, and potentially more, it's not personal information, but it's like business personal information. And it is data that is shared with a third-party company that we transact with. So part of the motivation of putting this system out on its own area is that it would be isolated from the rest of our environments. So we don't have a VPN connection into Azure from our corporate network or across our clouds like we do with our other deployments. So part of the reason was keeping sort of data safety, knowing that if one system is compromised, the other would not be. And then the other piece was, at the time, we thought, and this is part of the reason that C# was chosen as the language this part of the platform is built in, is that we would go to having more of a, mobile apps people would download, as well as the cloud and using Xamarin cross-platform to be able to build the application. So that was what was part of the impetus of using Azure. Another piece of it was uncertainty as to whether or not the team I was on would sort of do their own DevOps versus having the DevOps team we have doing the DevOps. So that's part of the other. This would be an area where our team could break things and we would not hurt our main production application that generates the bulk of our revenue. So if we completely take down our Azure services, we don't lose very much money. But if we took down our main application, we would lose all of our money.
And is the plan to continue to scale? Like, is there, like, if you're running Kubernetes with 5 nodes, like, you could have just run it on a couple of VMs maybe. I don't know what the workload's like, but in Azure, you know, so is the plan to scale significantly higher?
No. So based on sort of how the business is actually sort of built out, so it was a little over a year ago that we started planning our next set of product that's now been out for about 6 months. We're likely actually going to fold it all back into Amazon, minus a few ancillary pieces for some weird contractual reasons that will run out in Azure, and then some other specific to our third parties using Microsoft specific products. We'll keep some Azure footprint to be able to do valid testing.
Business requirements change very fast, and that was,
Yeah.
So that's kind of coming back to where it's just going to be put in with the other stuff.
Yeah, and that's the other piece is cost-wise. It's not increased costs at all to go and take our services and run them in a shared Kubernetes cluster that's in Amazon versus having our own entire, to Stack's point, cluster running in Azure that's only running one thing.
It looked like it was going to go that way, but I mean, yeah, like it would definitely would have been cheaper, and probably would have said just like, you know, whatever the Azure equivalent of, like, you know, like T2 videos, instead of like 2 or 3 of those, because it's not a super high traffic service like our other ones, so we definitely could have got away with it.
Right. So for the reason we built it out how we did was we were under the impression from a business standpoint we would need to sort of mirror what we had. We'd be able to deploy similar workloads, and then that was not the direction we ended up going from an overall larger company perspective, and then also specifically the 2 products that I work on.
Now, the question, I mean, you said the business needs kind of push you to Azure. Is there any type of reason, let's say a third time comes around and you realize, hey, the business needs want to push us to, let's say, Google Cloud. Is there any type of objective to say, hey, let's figure out the true business needs for a long term?
Oh.
Going around and another piece, and then eventually bringing it back to.
So, fun fact, we actually run full production in Amazon and Google Cloud.
Okay.
Our exact production.
Business with a large Fortune 1 company. Very that was the business requirement requirement. It wasn't like,
Okay.
wait, can we talk about this? It was.
You'll do this, and you say, okay, yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So we have to
Yeah.
kind of mirror. We have two DCs, two regions, Google, two Amazon.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of weird because it sounded like it was going back, and the question I was thinking was like, why would you do this? Like, the pieces were coming out, and I was like, well, what's the real reason?
We thought we had two clouds. We thought, might as well give a third a try, and
See how it goes, yeah.
But honestly, with Kubernetes running in AWS, GCP, and Azure is not that much different. As long as your interface to your infrastructure is Kubernetes, it's pretty. You'll run into weird edge cases, like I mentioned, around the load balancer being a little different across them. But for the most part, that's actually documented very well in the Kubernetes documentation, and they have all the little nuances that tell you what to do with each specific cloud provider. And Azure is now at a point where that's much more comfortable. Initially, you would find that documentation in a GitHub issue that was logged against AKS. And now it's in the official Kubernetes documentation. And it also helps that essentially each one of the three, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, have all essentially sort of stolen their own set of the Kubernetes developers and people in that space to go and work at their companies.
So is it fair to say once you brought up your cluster that it's pretty agnostic at this point already? Because it still seems like it's fairly new technology. Like,
there's some stuff that isn't very much. So there's annotations that you can put on things that kind of help shim, and like the providers for different clouds will say, okay, if you've got this annotation, like if you're trying to do internal load balancing, right, you can have multiple annotations for different clouds, so you'll get like approximately the same thing. There are certain features though that certain cloud providers have that others don't. Like I think Google's Kubernetes engine makes cluster auto scaling is built in from the get go. You don't have to really install your own, which Amazon's doesn't have with EKS. So there are some big differences, but I would say that those things kind of fall on the cluster operator versus the developer who's deploying, right? Like if you just got a pod or two that you want to run, it's very similar.
I'd say 95% similar. Like if you're looking at your Helm charts or your Kubernetes, yeah, it's almost identical, which is way better than.
that's good to hear.
There's like you said, a couple annotations.
So, you've got different apps. Your app has one app?
Yes.
And your team has its own operator for your cluster?
Technically, I am that operator currently.
Well, you've got a lot of depths.
So our team, so he mentioned we use a lot of languages. Our team is when I say our team, the team that writes our lending side of our platform. We operate in Golang, Node, Python, Kotlin, C#. I know it sounds terrible, all of those. It mostly is. It mostly is because there's 6 of us supporting it, so it's difficult to hop. But with Kubernetes and using Docker images to sort of go and deploy, it makes it, once you have the app sort of in a stable state, that it's much easier.
Our team's magic sauce, so we don't care what they run. Like, nearly as much as we used to, right? You give us a Docker container and some standardized YAML that does the load balancing and the routing, and we don't care what you put inside it.
Unless it's JVM.
Yeah,
based,
I would.
it requires tuning
Yeah.
out the ones they do.
I would say that's the biggest caveat. The JVM within Docker at all has been a challenge because there's so much tuning you can do, memory usage. So you sort of end up having 2 levels of configuration. It's what the Java processes can use, and then what you've configured in Kubernetes for those images, those Docker images, to be able to use. So you end up with sort of difficult debugging to figure out how you can do those workloads, and Stacks has spent a lot of time. Yeah. So I think our team is on Java 1.9 with our Kotlin stuff, and that's largely just because of the Kotlin ecosystem and their support.
So Tom actually did work for like there's experimental flags to make it run better. It's
Yeah,
working
yeah.
with the C group. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll deploy a Docker container. It'll see the host's memory and say, I'm going to grab all this up. But really, you know, you in Kubernetes, you've set, you know, resource limits at like, you know, 2 gigs of RAM. And it's like, oh, I want 8 gigs. Well, that's 32 gigabyte box and just going to kill. Like,
Yeah. The job sense was to have some built-in pieces to your Docker application that I was looking at that. Well, when you use it the next few weeks.
yes, I'll let you know next week.
When
it's in production.
Yeah. Tell me how it goes in production.
But if you pass the right flags in, it doesn't look at the box memory, it looks at the C group memory. And that's essentially what Docker has been given. If you use the resource limit feature on Kubernetes, which you should, you pretty much have to for it to make any sense. You gotta put RAM and CPU limits on everything.
Who manages your containers? You said, hey, give me a container, I'll run it. Who manages, like, we're running, we have a vanilla 1.9 container that we deploy. Somebody's checked off, or like,
Yeah. That's actually a mix because we have internal Docker hubs, right? And then we actually are running a Docker hub in Azure. That was one of the things I didn't mention. That was actually super easy, and the documentation was all accurate. Running the it's not called container registry. That's the official word.
For some of our base images, like, so we've got a collection of base images, like, we built them for Scala, you know, Java, and we'll go periodically and update those. We built them nightly on Sunday, or sorry, weekly on Sunday, for the next week, maybe if we can happen.
So, the idea of running, you know, Polyglot, I love the idea. Lived it, did it. The thing that I got to was, how do you set up the guide rails? Right, you're gonna operate, like, yep, you've got a team, Scala, Node. How do you get everybody to agree, this is how we play nicely together? Do you have that? How do you do that? What worked within?
So what has worked well for the play together nicely is instead of necessarily focusing on language, is focusing the group of people on the part of the product that they are responsible for. So yes, because we are engineers and we like to debate. We've had many debates around what language should be chosen, what should be done. But in the end, as long as your team of 3, 5, 6 is managing that set of features or that part of the product, what is built in for us has mattered less over time.
So I'm trying to drive to health. Like, hey, what tells me, operator, that your app is behaving nice? What metrics do I get from your thing? Do you
Right.
have like
So that's where we're in the process of having sort of, I would say, a developer mind shift to writing code that's proper for Kubernetes, meaning your application just essentially quickly kills itself as soon as it encounters an issue that it does not know how to resolve. So one instance of that is, say you run database migrations right before you deploy your app. Your app, when it spins up, so say you had tag 1.2, you're deploying tag 1.3. When 1.3 gets deployed and then it's going to start up, it should check before it officially says, oh, I'm ready. It should have a health check internally that says, oh, have the database migrations I expect ran yet? If they have, I'll happily run. If they have not, I'll die. And this is where Kubernetes is really nice, is as long as you have your checks, like, so for us, we usually have some like API/health check. We have some endpoint on all of our containers, not necessarily our containers, but our apps that will say that they're healthy. And then for our containers, the way we've configured them is I think it's a 3-second check. I don't remember how fast the Kubernetes check is to know that your pod is healthy.
make sure that these things are working, whether you're in language A, B, or C. Not do these things, give me an
We don't start. I know exactly where you're going for. We don't have that, and that's I don't think like you're talking almost like a specification, like a 12-factor app. Like you're gonna serve a health check on this app or something, so it's standardized across all of your apps.
Right.
We don't really have that. I mean, we health check. Like a lot of times, the apps will pull in their own like play framework or something, and they'll like have like some kind of pre-configured health
like so following that, like, hey, we're doing play framework. That'll always follow this pattern guideline. That's what I'm looking for. It's like, what
Yeah.
are the rails you put around?
So
stuff?
we're not suggest that everybody have a health check. In Kubernetes, you can use HTTP health checks on whatever port you want. You can run arbitrary commands inside of a container and check a return code, or you can do a port check. So there's actually a lot of flexibility in the ecosystem on methods of doing health checks. It's recommended that we have them, but not everyone is doing it.
Yeah. And that's where what I meant, we're sort of in the middle of that sort of mindset change. One of the things we actually did at Cerner when we worked that was really awesome in our set of Rails applications is we shared a gem, and we had a specification that was, if you run a Rails app, you fill out this YAML file, and it will know, all right, this is a database endpoint, this is where I need to be able to hit it. You could specify which ones were critical dependencies, meaning if you can't do it, your app's dead, and other ones that are sort of tertiary, like, oh, I can't hit S3, but I only use S3 for backup files, so that doesn't mean my application's down, it's just minorly out. And that's something that was developed when we worked at Cerner that was really nice that they used in their Rails ecosystem there. And that made it really easy. You just Jim installed it, and yeah.
That was a lot like nice because from a IP perspective, they said, hey, you're gonna write Ruby on Rails, and we're gonna develop a lot of tooling and stuff like that, so that you're not solving the same problem 10 times, right? You can concentrate on business logic because you've got such a huge team here. If someone says, hey, whether it's the language issue or like this language is actually better suited to a problem, they're just gonna write that, and it's kind of you're implementing something.
That kind of goes into the automation. Finding things you can automate.
Great question. So how do you automate your deploying to production to 2 different clouds? What does that pipeline look like? Never mind. Another time.
We have it, but it's not terrible, actually. We have an interface that was built in-house. I don't know if it's been mentioned at this meetup before. It's been mentioned at the Golang meetup. Essentially a bunch of Go services, and it's a nice UI where you can go in and say, all right, I want to deploy to the Amazon production cloud. I want to deploy to the GCP production cloud. It's been an in-house built solution, but it is pretty nice. You walk in, these are the branches I want to deploy. You click a button, it deploys it, usually successfully.
I was going to add to that guardrails thing. It's probably easier said than done, but as a company, if you set like core tech values, right? For example, in my world, if you're building web applications, you say your pages should load within 3 seconds, right? It's not, I don't care if you use Angular, Vue, React. If it doesn't load, then we're not going to take it. And then you can enforce that.
I will level set first. I'm a cowboy. I was a guy. Oh, fine. Help. Good. Yeah, we'll go. And now, matured a little bit, and I just see the value in, hey, we're gonna make sure that we have, health and the health Z pattern that Kelsey Hightower does. Like, we have something like that, and that's across the board, so that operator, whoever steps into that role, understands. Okay, I know where to look for things, kind of like a playbook for whatever state you're doing, and seeing the value in that across the company. See more and more of that, and the teams that appear to be doing well and moving fast, they've got that, and it goes quicker. Yeah, I'm just looking for better outcomes that like.
Yeah. Main thing our team's been focusing on is just making sure our pods die correctly. And actually die. We had a problem where SIG term codes were not getting sent to the processes properly because you should really only run one process per pod. You shouldn't spin a bunch of sub-processes inside of it.
So you kind of glanced at this about you had this privacy/regulatory concern, and that's why you want to run separately. How much of a concern is that to be merging in? Are you worried about pulling extra things into scope for various?
So part of it was a misunderstanding of PCI. So
Exactly.
the data we're storing, in fact, is not PCI related at all because it has nothing to do with payment cards.
Well, that's nice.
So
So essentially, you put it on Azure for the purpose of this meeting.
yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, there's less concern in that area now because we've better defined how the business is going to run for the foreseeable future from our lending side.
Let's take 5, have a break. Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's take 5, have a quick break, come back in, and we're going to have Dan talk about how tools will positively affect your culture.
Cool, I mean, fucking cool, right? I mean,
Thanks, dude. That was awesome.
Actually, I guess I'm willing to thank you.
Aaron,
Restrooms are.
Oh, it's down. It's down there.
Just kind of chaotic. We've been to it. Directing rails, that's what you're doing.
Make things. Just make the business case.
How is the CLI?
There's probably somewhere.
It's actually, it is very simple. So if you use it is sort of, it's very similar paradigm. It's sort of, the only Azure AZ with that.
You didn't have to bust out his tower shell.
I have no idea.
It all works.
Came out.
time consuming.
Laptop's the one that doesn't work?
It is.
Everybody else's laptop works except for yours.
Oh, mine's
garbage. I think you need to get this to work.
I needed to take it back.
I would.
I don't know. Just put these here. All right.
Dan!
Hey!
Hi, Dan.
Hi. All right. So,
What's the tool?
you. That's teamwork, man. All right. Tools affect culture. Deal with it. So I probably also said this, that DevOps is all about culture, and culture affects your tools. So no talking. So I think that that both are true, that there's a symbiotic relationship, and I'm not just trying to be two-faced and say that, you know, it's both things. It's both you know, culture affecting tools, and that's really what's the important part, or it's tools affects culture, and that's really the important part. I think you've seen that throughout the life cycle of DevOps, where you have people who will go out and buy a tool and hope that that suddenly transforms their company. And then you have other people who will go out and just try to do the culture side, and then they find that they're struggling to get their tools to work the way that they want their new culture to work. So I found that it takes both, and that both sides vary, I think inversely at least, in importance. So at times culture is more important, and at other times the tool selection is more important. And you all know as much as I do about what slide is coming next, because I made this earlier today. So the 12-factor app, who here knows what a 12-factor app is, or knows 12factor.net, ever looked at it before? Hands up if you know about it. Okay, okay, like maybe half-ish. So 12-factor app is kind of like a cloud native app. Has anybody ever seen the cloud native apps thing? I mean, that's basically a 12-factor app. There's a lot of standard type of design principles there of how you should develop that so that it's resilient and it has certain interfaces. So we require that, at least of our cloud native platforms, of our internal applications. But a lot of times we don't require that of our third-party vendors. So they will deliver a very large Java application. It's the one that everyone refers to every time someone says, well, you're not going to take everything and put it on Kubernetes, right? Because there's always this other one, is PeopleSoft, the one that scares everybody. So and many other apps that particular group makes that aren't very cloud native. So at the NAIC, this is kind of in beta, and we've done, I don't know, probably more than a half dozen now tool selections based off of this criteria, and trying to reevaluate some of our internal tools. So I wrote an article, and that's kind of where this comes from, and then Avi forced me into presenting tonight. And I wrote an article for opensource.com, and I'll show you the link here in a minute. And you can read in a little bit more detail. But so these are what I consider the priority order. You have a REST API that provides full functionality. We then rate these as green, yellow, or red. So a REST API that doesn't provide full functionality, but there is a REST API that provides some, we might say that's yellow. If there's no REST API, then maybe it's red. And if it's fully functional, it's green. And as we rate through these, we can kind of get a better understanding of the actual tool. So the REST API being fully functional is really beneficial for automation or being able to integrate with that tool in the future. I don't know if anybody's tried to integrate with some of these tools that feel like the API was put on, just weeks ago, and it's really poor syntax, just very confusing. And a lot of times, at least at some point after a couple of weeks, I'll just give up and continue to do it manually.
So that I've decided that is the most important. It's always open to debate. This list is in GitHub or GitLab, so anybody can go in and submit a change to it. I also want the software to be able to be provisioned immutably. We have a particular tool that is very integral to our applications, and it is something that would either, if we deploy it separately from our applications, it introduces more security risks, and if we try to spin it up with our applications, it's not immutable. So we would have to go on and manually make configuration changes every time we spun up a new container, which would probably keep us very busy. So that's really not something we can do. And that's something that we're looking at as we look at these tools that we already have. If we can't automate it, that's a big challenge for us. If we can't install it immutably. The next one is kind of similar to that, where you should be able to get all of this configuration through static files. They're somewhat related. The immutability is also covering whether or not it can be spun up again and without affecting anything, that they're idempotent. So the static files is that we can store all of that in Git rather than having all of that stored in some database somewhere that we don't know what's going on in there. The next one is that it's open source. So that's just a company bias that we want things to be open source and we want to be able to contribute back to them. Who here knows what the NAIC is? Hey, good. It's as if two of the people work there who run the meetup. Okay, so the NAIC is a nonprofit, and we get all of our money from you all. So thank you. If you look at your insurance bill, you'll probably see NAIC on there and a little bit of money that you gave us. So we want to become as efficient as possible, and we also want to contribute back. So we want to take that, everything that we're getting and contribute that back to the community to whatever extent we can. So we have a strong bias towards having open source, which is why that's on the list. Open standards. So I'm involved with cloud events. Does anybody know what cloud events is? Nobody? Nobody knows what cloud events is? Dang, I should have given a presentation on cloud events. Yeah. Yeah, so it's part of the CNCF. It's now an incubating project. It's a spec for serverless events in the cloud. And it's something that Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are all involved in to help standardize that format for the communications, as well as the whole workflow, and we're developing SDKs, things like that. So we meet every Thursday at 11 Central, and you can hop on the Zoom and be entertained, and it's a great way to learn how to run a meeting, because Doug, who runs it, is freaking awesome.
Is this to standardize how things like Lambda and Whisk can be used together?
Yep. Yep, and we're having the arguments of how much we want to standardize there, and how much the clouds want to standardize, really, I think is the conversation. They're all recorded, so you can go back and watch them all. But you'll see some strong defenses of, look, some people have built a lot of things, an Amazon person, some people have built a lot of things that, that are really efficient because we program this way, so you shouldn't make the code transportable, because then we'd have to rewrite everything. So there's a lot of those, which are, obvious that you don't want to go rewrite your entire system just because someone made an open standard. Right now, we're just basing it on the semantics of the interface, and we haven't done, and I don't know that we've even decided we want to do any type of domain-specific language or something that is standard across everybody, so that we can just take the code and put it on one to the other, sort of like Kubernetes with Docker. We haven't decided we wanted to do anything like that. That's what I would like as a consumer of this stuff, because I don't want to have to rewrite all, an application of functions just so I can run it on another thing. I'm just going to use OpenWhisk or OpenFaz or something like that if I want to run it on multiple clouds. So if you're interested in this and you want to be able to run your code on like Lambda and Google Cloud Functions and Azure Cloud Function, whatever Azure has. Okay, Azure Functions. If you want to be able to run them across all those, join the call and argue with the people. There's a guy from Amazon too that was requesting some feedback on that to find out like what their customers actually want. And if we're not vocal, then they'll do what they think is best. So, yeah, it's the CNCF and kind of this community and how everybody interacts has really taught me a lot about how to run a community or an organization, especially with a lot of very tense discussions that occur and a lot of stakes, a lot of things at stake for each individual. So I think it's worth just watching, just to see kind of how things get dealt with and how voting occurs and how people come to a consensus, and it's pretty interesting. It's an awesome little community. So I hope to see like an extra, 30 people or however many people are here on the call on Thursday at 11. So that's an open standard. So like OpenFAS and I think OpenWhisk and I think Google are using the first version, or maybe Azure too, I don't remember. They did a demo at Cloud Native Con in EU that tested it through like all of these different vendors. So that was really cool. Does anybody know what open tracing is? Yeah, basically Zipkin. That's another CNCF project. Open API, Swagger, yeah, that's Open API now. Is that part of CNCF now? Does anybody know? I don't know. Smart Bear owns Swagger, but I thought they donated Open API to somebody. Anyway, so those are the things I look for, but there's other open standards as well. And those are things I look for. And if they have, let's say there's a tracing system that has Open API for their API, but they don't use open tracing, then that would probably be yellow. And something that we wouldn't want to use as much, but every tool I know of pretty much uses open tracing except for cloud vendors. Datadog, I think. Datadog and one other one are the only two that do it, that are cloud vendors. So the next one is offered as a SaaS or hosted so that we don't really run anything. That's another company thing that we don't want to run things that aren't really value add. So if we can avoid running it, we will try to do that. We'll try to do some managed service or a SaaS. That's not going to be true of every company. And this is, last one is that we can deploy it to public cloud. That's also there for a particular company. That would cost us more if we deployed it to the public cloud and not theirs. What?
What does that company name rhyme with? Is it
I don't. What the heck? Yeah. What rhymes with that? Yes, that is the company. It was the company starred in the Matrix, I believe, or had a role, a supporting role in the Matrix. So yeah, so that's why that one's on there really. And we wanted to make sure that no one else would charge us more for running it in the cloud for some reason. There are some other, or at least there used to be some other software back a year or two ago when I was looking at stuff at another company that did change the licensing based off of running in the cloud or running in the data center. And that was really because we were currently purchasing it based on number of sockets, and you don't have sockets in most clouds. So you have to start paying by the core, which drastically increased our price. So this is not something that we use to say, hey, this one's more green than the other one, this is what we're going to use. We just want to go into it consciously, making a decision saying, we know that it's not using, let's say, any open standards. And we're okay with that. We know that there are some and that we would have to, migrate our interface or whatever, our libraries to this other standard if we ever decided to switch. The open source one's a big one, so we chose GitLab using this methodology. And we thought that the open source nature of GitLab was really valuable to us. And Aaron and I and a lot of GitLabber help. Recently pushed in a change that will come out, next month, I think? Yeah, it'll be out next month. So we were able to actually push out a change that we wanted in the product, and that will, they're actually starting work on a whole bunch of other templates. So we did a license template because we have a particular license that we want everybody to be able to have access to in the regular user interface, as if it was a BSD license or an Apache 2 license. And so we introduced that, but we introduced the entire structure of how templates would work. And so now they're starting to build new templates in there so that we can create, a GitLab CI file from our own custom set of templates, which is going to be really cool. And so that'll be really nice when that finally drops. But that kind of collaboration, and, we got invited into their Slack, and, we're able to communicate regularly. We did YouTube videos, so you can go check those out and watch us struggle. It was hard. So if you're ever feeling like you don't know what you're doing, go watch me try to program in Ruby on Rails.
Nice hour where I say
And I happily went along too. So we picked other tools that weren't open source using the same model. And we just use it as a tool to say, these are the things that we value as a company and value in our tools, and this is what we want to make decisions by, and have that codified so that everybody knows and it's transparent that this is how we make our decisions. We also document all of our discussions. We usually have another couple of pages of kind of discovery and detailing each little piece and saying, like, it had open API but not open tracing, or open tracing and not open API. And we have kind of a conclusion section generally. Let's see. One that I haven't put on here is, what is the culture of the tool creator? So I wanted to put that on, but I haven't really, because I'm not sure entirely how to quantify that. But for example, we pick GitLab, and GitLab has a pretty incredible culture. And so that has rubbed off a lot. They have their handbook that's public. Anybody can submit a change to their handbook. If you want to be funny, you can go submit a change to their handbook. But you could, if you found spelling errors or something, or if you wanted to change their culture somehow, you could go and submit a change. But they're very open. They've been posting all of their sales training on YouTube, which is really weird. But you get to see like how they're going to sell you. So I don't know if it's a good business strategy, but
having looked at sales, this blew my mind. I was like, their sales strategy?
Right?
That's public?
Yeah, when I first started watching, I was like, this isn't for me. This isn't like, this is weird. Okay. Yeah. Did they accidentally hit to put it public, or should I tell somebody? Yeah, it was pretty awesome. But they share all kinds of stuff, and they share, they try to share their roadmap, like where they want to go. And so that has really helped grow our culture internally. And so I look at, maybe a company that might have already been mentioned in here. I look at the culture of the companies that we're getting into business with, because we're consuming what their culture has produced. And so I take that as something that I investigate, and I want to know more about, what their culture, what their internal culture is. The same thing, like if you're getting involved with a startup, you want to know who their investors are. You want to know how many rounds they've been through. What's their strategy? Where are they expecting a buyout, or they want to go IPO? GitLab wants to go IPO. They don't ever want to sell. That's all out there. It's insane how much is out there. So I've thought that was really cool, and I've found that those that getting involved with those systems and kind of putting our money with the cultures that we want involved with our company has helped our culture. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes,
Stacks.
I think on your checklist, I think it was number 2 about requiring it to be provisioned.
Yes.
mean, I don't know how many backing apps you guys have. Is that mainly for like integration testing, or I mean, just for testing in general? Or I guess what's the rationale, like, or multiple points there could be behind it?
A lot. So we want our internal apps. So we want everything to have basically the same operational model. And our goal for our internal apps, and these are idealistic, asks that we want these things that internally we may not have yet either. But we want our internal apps to be immutable as well, so that they can die off. That they can find that they have no database, they can die off and then restart, and they're fine. Nothing happened. We had particularly a reverse proxy that wasn't immutable. Well, if you're going to be standing up reverse proxies that are doing TLS termination and you want to have them in more of an Istio configuration where they're a sidecar, well, you can't really manually configure those every time they spin up. Plus, they were massive. So we need to start looking at other opportunities, or we need to be able to push the manufacturer, the developers, in that direction of like, this is what we want, so that we can have the same operating model. We don't want to run them on VMs. We don't want to run them as daemon sets and then have keys sitting all over the place because we have all of these different proxies sitting everywhere. And we don't want another jump, so we'd have to co-locate them. There's all kinds of additional complexities. And when we run our third-party apps, we don't want those to be one-offs that we have to run in some special way, to whatever extent possible. I don't know if any of them have been green yet. Probably the only one that would be green now, and only now, is because GitLab's running on Kubernetes now. But that wasn't true when we first selected them. Whoever wants to go.
Did you happen to use StackShare.io at all?
Yeah, I didn't use, well, yeah, I guess I did use it with this. So yeah, I've been using StackShare.io for a few years now. It's pretty awesome. Has anybody heard of StackShare.io? No? Oh.
Is it like sharing a text package or anything?
Oh, hold on.
I
Let
sent
me.
you a link, but GitHub and Bitbucket came up earlier, so if you happen to have your...
Yeah. So they also have a newsletter, which is really good. Let's see. So they usually have a comparison thing. They'll show all kinds of information. Where is the...
So companies, for whatever reason, I don't know if their legal department is down with this, they share, you can go see what else company you care for. You're like, oh, I really like this company. I wonder if they use similar tools as me.
And I would...
All out here. People are just giving them.
Yeah, I would say grain of salt, though, because I have worked for a company, and we saw our name somewhere that we installed it as a POC. So we were not really using it. We weren't paying for it. We didn't even end up picking it. So grain of salt, but yes, I'm sure all of these companies have probably used it to some extent, whether that's POC or not. But I think you can do the alternatives here, so you can see all their ratings and their stars. You can click on each one. There's also something called, so yeah, I use this for looking at things. I also look at G2 Crowd, I think. It always reminds me of IT Crowd, which is a great show, and you should go watch it on Netflix. So this one is the same way, although this one's a little bit more, I think, enterprise. I don't know that it has GitLab. Oh, it does. And it's got a bunch of reviews. Great. So I usually look at this stuff for more enterprisey legacy tools. But they show, well, that's nice. Not more useful than GitHub. What does that even mean? Is it as useful then, or is it
Submitted by GitHub.
I was gonna say.
Okay. So, and it's got a bunch of comparisons as well. Yeah, I guess it does compare to Jira, because it's got issues and everything. So you can do big comparisons and see all these reviews and everything. It's pretty cool. Also, my article is here. If anybody wants to go watch it or look at it, it's how tools affect culture. All right. Any other? Yes. Sorry, Avi.
So when you drive transformations, right, these are the hardest things. Like you focus on culture, or you focus on tools, or a bit of both. How do you? And maybe a lot of people haven't figured out the answer yet. But what's your approach? How do you know how much to invest? Because you don't want to invest too much.
Yeah, no one's figured it
Okay.
out. Invest too much. Like, what do you mean by invest too much?
So let's say you're driving tooling, right?
Mhm.
So you want to be able to show the whole company or the whole teammates, like, use these tools and your lives will be much easier. Now, first of all, what do you have to get them all on board to embrace open source, right? So where do you like start?
It takes a long time.
Okay.
So it's a long game.
Yeah, didn't you guys do a talk about that?
You can't talk.
Oh, hey, I'm just giving information.
So essentially, change the flow.
Yeah, so there was one company where we were trying to integrate with something. Sorry, Sean. Thought you might appreciate that. So there was one company that we were trying to integrate with a fairly old tool, and that took a lot of time. It was very frustrating. A lot of people were getting disengaged, and it was just we weren't getting anywhere. We were just spinning our wheels, and it was, in my opinion, it was adverse to the culture, and that we shouldn't be doing it. We should probably find a new tool to use if that producer could not produce something that we needed for the future. Now, switching over would have taken a long time, so that needs to be weighed as well. But if you are, so tools you can introduce quickly a lot of times. It depends on, everything's contextual, so don't just take it and run with it, everybody. So we're doing a very large transformation, and we're trying to do it in a short amount of time, and we're moving things to AWS, but we don't want to just lift and shift and take, what we're doing now in a confined resource space where we won't just run up a giant bill and move that into a space where we have unlimited resources, and we may very well drive up our bill quickly with the way we currently manage everything. So we're trying to convert things into Kubernetes and GitLab. We're currently using Subversion, so we're trying to get into Git. We're doing a lot of change, which I think is usually not always advised to do that much change at once, because it's a lot to manage for each person. We have some imperatives that are driving us to do that, and so to me, it's really about empowering everyone to be able to move forward at their own pace, and making sure that we provide them enough runway that their pace will get them to where we need to go when we need to get there. And it's really hard. And when you're doing cultural transformations, you need to look out 3 months, 6 months, because whatever you're doing today, you won't see any real impacts for 3 months or 6 months. And then you'll suddenly see, like, oh, hey, these people over here are starting to do this thing that I talked about a while ago. This is awesome. You also have to be willing to let things fail, which kind of sucks. But people have to learn on their own. You can't just tell them that this is the way it is and these are the things you need to know. It's more valuable to have learned it doing it than learn it by someone telling you. And also, I don't know most I don't have enough context to know anything about what, some person that's a BA or a developer in one of the divisions of the company should do to be successful in their area. And so I'm probably going to tell them the wrong thing. I can give them a direction to go, but if I had to come in and tell them, like, this is how you should do your job for the next 3 months to get where you need to go, then they're probably gonna be really mad at me in 3 months, because they're not gonna be there, and I'm gonna be really disappointed because I told them the wrong thing. So there's a lot of parents involved. Who here is doing a transformation now? So how have you found it, Avi?
It's challenging,
Yeah.
because you got to find a lot of like-minded people.
Yeah, a lot of like-minded people. That's right. Getting some champions. Yep. Yep, definitely. We introduced Slack and GitLab. So we introduced GitLab, and that was really awesome, and it drove a lot of change. We also introduced Slack, and that has been freaking awesome. So both of those, I predicted a very small number of people would join, and I think GitLab is probably 4 times that amount already in a quarter of the time. So I said like 50 people in the first year. That's how many people will use it, and we're at close to 200, and within a few months we had that many. And then Slack is I'm not gonna let you do it, man. Hold on. So Slack is I think we're around 300 now, maybe. I get the DevOps KC one and the company one, and so I get a little confused. But I think we're around 300, maybe over 300. Our CEO just joined. I have not announced it to anyone outside of the IT group. And we have the library showed up one day. So like the library folks are on there, and we're talking about books in a channel, and they said, okay, we'll order that, and it'll be in the library whenever you want it. I'm like, that is freaking awesome. And they have ACM stuff. They're saying, yeah, it's so cool. So then it's like the CTO said that maybe sometimes I was overselling Slack, but he's like, most of the time you were underselling it. So it's such a game changer for what we're doing, and we started paying for it, but we've only really had that and kind of announced it and developed communications for like 3 weeks, and it's already just changing how we work. Yes, stacks.
All right. So when we talk about how tools affect culture, we often kind of jump to like software tools, right?
Yes.
Or kind of product. I kind of think like, well, I mean, people are, tools that they're useful like in a certain way. So we're thinking about giving a team the ability to accomplish something. I mean, I'm curious if we tried full stack teams at our place. I don't know if anyone else has tried them. Because I feel like if you give that team, they'd have all the tools right there to make the change that they need to drive that culture. Whereas, if you've got 3 different teams all with, opposing, marching orders, or like, hey, go to this product. You've been told to help this team and not that team because that's not what like your
right.
message is. So, thoughts on that?
So, I feel like that's more of a question about silos. Is that accurate, or that the tools are different, but they're different because they're siloed? Is that?
Sounds like you're doing like shadow IT on the side, that no one wants to have an overall function.
Yeah, I don't know. So Gary kind of joined our team, right? Like you said, he's not really DevOps, but he's kind of DevOps because
he's moonlighting.
Yeah. We were. It's a good thing, and I almost wondered if we shouldn't do the reverse of it. Like we pulled one person from his team into our because they weren't getting enough, support from us because we were like told to stand up more data centers and go to other things, support the business. But at the same time, we're being told that their team's focus is important. So I'm wondering do we just say, hey, we should just carve up the DevOps team and disseminate that knowledge among all the teams, so like each team can be fully accountable, responsible, and have everything they need to get stuff done? Or I'm sort of like what other people have done for that, or how do you tell this?
So yeah, we're facing that challenge now. So we have a group that was separate. That was our platform services, our technology services or area, which was they ran all the servers and JBoss and middleware and all that kind of stuff. So that was merged under the CTO right at the same time to the company. And we took one of those teams of all infrastructure type people, some security people, security engineer type people, and merged them with a bunch of developers. And we created a platform team. And those are the people standing up all of our Terraform stuff in AWS, doing GitLab, a lot of other new tools, like they're working on Dynatrace and set of Victor Ops and things like that. So we have the rest of the group there that we don't really have a strategy. We have some ideas of what we want to do, like maybe we integrate them into each team. We have an interesting relationship with our wholly owned subsidiary, National Insurance Producer Registry, NIPR, and they are looking at potentially hiring additional developers and kind of starting those people as the operator for that team, and then pushing that knowledge out to the rest of the team members so that everyone takes on the same burden. Everyone would pass the pager. I kind of like that model, but I think it's highly contextual. It depends a lot on the size of your company as well as to what kind of scale is important. I can see a reason to always have like a platform type team at a large enough team where you need to have someone who's managing the platform, but then the apps and what we called it DST app ops, which came from Red Hat. I think I stole it from one of their slides. But it was app ops there, and the app ops would be the operations for the application, but there was a separate group that did platform type stuff. And that might be where you have your specializations like a DBA, not to go make changes, but to help improve everyone's database code and their database indexes, things like that. I don't know if that answered your question at all. I forgot it halfway through, so.
While we have, there was a silo previously, I'm on one of the teams he was describing, and we're learning every day, we're moving forward, and then depending on which seat you're sitting in throughout the company, like I had someone be like, well, you guys are building a new silo.
Yeah.
And we're like,
Yeah, there's that.
I'm like, but we're not. We're trying to be much more open to the last silo. Like, we're open this window, or whatever, but it's hard because I think you're on a centralized DevOps type of team too. Like you're solving a bunch of problems, and you're spending a full day learning and absorbing and solving those problems. The thing I struggle with and have for like the last 5 or 10 years of being on these centralized teams is how much of that, like how do you get that information out to the rest of the company and still maintain your sanity of being able to absorb and do all the work for the centralized team? Is that kind of like what you're struggling with, or?
Well, I think the thing, like, so we've implemented Kubernetes pretty much across the board, but now the question becomes, okay, it's well documented, people can pretty much self-service, but are the app teams actually going to self-service it, or is it going to be us going and, writing help templates for this stuff, right? Like, at the end of the day, we just moved the bug to a different
Right.
deployment